Hey everyone, welcome to our LinkedIn Live. We rephrased our LinkedIn Live series to leading your agency as we're dealing with topics that are relevant for leading an effective and efficient agency. So we'll be focusing on topics that are relevant for you as the leader or CEO in an agency. And we're really we want to drill down on the things that cause pain. And agencies are people-based business, so there's a lot of pain, right? Because wherever people are involved, things get complex, and there's a lot of work to be done. So this is the topics that we want to cover for you. What can you do to run a more efficient and more effective agency, and with that also a better place to work? Today with us again is Francesco, head of consulting at Assembly. My name is Benjamin, the founder of Assembly Consulting. And today, as the title says, we want to focus on why your team doesn't track time. We find this to be a very common problem in our client's organization, and there's a few issues with that. And we want to first walk you through why we think tracking time is important for your agency, because not everybody would agree, right? There are people that would argue it is not that important. And, you can argue about that. But from our point of view, there are four very important factors that make it a good use of your time, pun intended, to track your time. So first of all, you got to understand profitability. Regardless of whether or not you sell your clients hours or not, as an agency are a people-based business, time people spend is the best or it's the single largest cost position that goes into your profitability, right? So you want to understand what the profitability looks like for your projects, and for that to happen, you have to obviously know what you earn and then subtract what you're paying, and this is mainly, to the most part, time of your team. So how much time they spend on any given project will tell you what the profitability of that project is. This becomes even more true if you're actually billing hours to your client, right? So if you tell your client, listen to your client, I'm charging you 100, 150 US dollars per hour, or whatever else currency or amount that would be for you, you obviously have to understand how many hours you've spent. And I think this is the most direct and clear correlation between earning money and tracking time. So in this case, it's obviously non-negotiable that you track time. Let's say, second step benefit of tracking time and understanding what your team spends time on is obviously identifying bottlenecks and forecasting and planning capacity, right? So outside of the billing and profitability aspect, you'll also learn about what your team spends time on, right? And then you can see if there's a disproportionately large amount of time spent on a certain task, there might be an issue with the process. If you find that your SEO strategist tracks 55, 60 hours a week, there might be a capacity issue, right? So this is very, very clear signal to act, and you need to understand what the time spent actually is to be able to do that. And lastly, the last reason why a team should track time, is the Hawthorne effect. That basically says you can already alter behavior just by letting people know that you're measuring it, right? So the example Francesco just had, if you want to diet, just starting to journal about what you eat will change what you eat already. And the same is true for time tracking. The people use their time differently if they have to account for what they use it for. So these are four very strong indicators why tracking time is a good thing, but then it doesn't happen in many agencies. Francesco, why is that? Out of your experience, why do people not track time in agencies?
Yeah, there are several reasons. Some of them are good. Some of them are, I would say, less valid, but still they are brought up by the team regularly. One of the typical ones is about the tool. It's so tool-wise, people find the tool that they either don't have a good tool or they don't have a tool at all. And I would say this is the most easy issue to address, because time can be in the most extreme and simplest instances can be tracked even in basic tools like from spreadsheets to Airtable, and I mean there are tons of the dedicated tools for time tracking. So it's rare that these kind of issues have an origin in the technology or in the tools, but definitely this is something that comes up. Another one, again, very common and a little bit more grounded, is that the process is too complex. Sometimes there are tools that are quite clunky, or there are processes that are quite clunky, and you have to click a lot of buttons just to track 15 minutes of work. So that is that becomes a nightmare for the person to do that on a regularly basis. Also, sometimes you have good tools, but maybe you have 2 or 3 of them. So maybe you have to track time in multiple places. So that's something that adds a barrier to time tracking. And then another one is this is a topic dear to me, and this is a bit of a cosmetic and less appreciated fact, but sometimes agencies, they measure the profitability by project, and this, which is a very good thing if the time is tracked consistently. But what happens is that there is really no balancing pressure to track 100% of the time. So basically, the project managers have the incentive of having profitability high, but the team doesn't have, or at least is not enforced, a clear mandate of having also the billability of each single individual high. So the incentive is not to bill, not to track time on the project, so that cosmetically the project looks much more profitable than it is. And we've seen it with clients. We have a project profitability of 80%. So like every dollar billed, 80 cents are basically of profits, and which looks great. And then you do the same calculation at the company level, and you see that the relation is the other way around. So you have every dollar of revenue, you have 20% of profit and 80% of costs in the best of instances. But sometimes you're not even profitable, and this is because the time gets tracked into like a general bucket, so you don't really know what's your real profitability. Another point is this is simply not a priority. So especially the CEOs, the entrepreneurs, the head of the teams, they say they want to build time, but then they don't really follow through with that, either on a personal level. So they don't, from a personal perspective, they don't track time themselves, but they expect their team to do so. And in the end, example is the best driver for the team. So this is very important. And also, there are not really incentives to do that. We mentioned billability is normally, so the percentage of time that gets tracked on paid work versus the total time spent working. This is normally a measure of the utilization of the team, of the resources. I come from consulting. This was basically one of the metric to clear in order for instance to be promoted. So billability is very important, and there should be incentives to do that, to track time, and these incentives not to do that. Again, this is sometimes the team don't understand why they need to do that. So it seems like an administrative task, and made only for maybe the controllers or the CFO to have more numbers to crunch. But there are definitely, this is actually valuable information that allows the company to make good decisions when it comes to hiring team, to taking or not a project, to how to quote projects. So, but sometimes the team doesn't know, doesn't understand that. So I would say this is the first step to do so. Another one is, and this is something we see very often, is the the tracking of time gets fragmented over many categories. So you have a client level, and then you have the project, and below the project you have 10 tasks, and it becomes very difficult, no? Especially if you are just starting out with time tracking, you want to keep it as simple as possible. Just even tracking at a client level, at least as a start, that's good enough. And then once you have 100% compliance, you can incrementally try to expand. So you can maybe divide the time in client meetings, in the content delivery, and other buckets. But at the beginning, focus on having 100% compliance, as opposed to having like these idealized, very detailed data set. So I would say these are the main reason for which team doesn't track time.
Yeah, thank you, Francesco. And I think it's, I mean, all of these are understandable, right? That they play a role, but some of them are really, easy to fix. Others are a bit more complex. But let's dive in. So, what can you do to change that, right? So you find your agency doesn't really track time well, and as Francesco just said, the first point to start changing that is really clearly describe why this is important and what you want the team to do, right? Because again, you have to make it very obvious that this is not just an administrative burden that you come up with just because you have a bad day, right? But rather explain why these numbers are both important for the short-term success and profitability of the business, but also for the long-term growth and sustainability of it. So all the things that Francesco had mentioned around what is the profitability of this one very project, but then also around understanding what is the profit margin across the company, what is the billability of an individual, to really understand the dynamics of how you generate value for your clients. Because in the end, time that's billable is what your clients pay you for. That can be viewed equal as this is what generates value. So you want to obviously keep that high. And I think making your team, helping them see the clear picture of why this is a priority for you is a first critical step in order to improve and manifest the time tracking in your organization. The next one, and I think this is really a complex one, but then also it's not really complex, is you have to use it to base metrics on it, right? Metrics, or another term for this would be KPIs, right? If you're having KPIs in the company that you regularly look at, use the tracked time to inform these metrics, because then naturally they find their way into the discussion, right? So we think that obviously if you track time, you have to do something with it that's visible for the team. And one of the best ways of doing this is to basically say, we measure the success of our projects. And part of that is the time that has been spent on these projects. If it's done smartly, as Francesco just described, with an added layer of, we also view either the company level or billability on an individual level to avoid, shortcutting or let's say altered records when it comes to the project profitability. So you want to have an accurate picture. So basically, people should have an incentive to track all of their time. And that being said, Francesco, what would be your take on the question? Because this is one we hear very often, on the question of, should I track only billable, so project-related time, or should I have the team track all of their time? Basically, maybe having a bucket for internal work or admin or email or whatever. So would you recommend tracking all of the time or just billable time?
At the beginning, in general, I would track all of the time, with the understanding that the internal unbillable time could be tracked only on with a single bucket. So one internal bucket for the internal projects, and so you really have the relation between billable and unbillable time. And this is very important. Then you can get more granular, and you can have like sales effort, marketing. You can have internal meetings, and you can split. But I would track like really internal and by client at the beginning. And this is very important because sometimes there are, the team screams for hiring more people because they are overwhelmed. And then you look at the billability, and you see average billability is 30%. So apparently they have capacity to take on three times the number of projects that you currently have. So what's going on? Either they don't bill, or they are working also on internal activities that they are basically taking from the efficiency. So it's very important to have these simple metrics at end. So profitability and billability are the basic ones.
Yeah, and I agree that it makes sense to track internal time just as a bucket to be sure you know what the full 100% are, right? Because otherwise it's more like it's like in the restaurant when you take the rest of the bill that nobody has paid for and it's surprisingly large, right? You want to know what these how many hours are there that are non-billable, right? Because just assuming because somebody has a 40-hour contract and you have 30 billable hours, that the rest of the hours is 10, might be accurate, but it might not be. There might be another 20 hours to spend on internal stuff, right? Which has an impact on your capacity planning. So track all the time, ask your team to track all the time, but keep it as aggregated as you can where possible, right? And this is especially true for internal things. And then as you find that it's adopted well and that there's meaning to it, you can break it down further, both on the internal and the project side. Okay, so next one, very strong one, obviously, is tying time tracking to compensation. Francesco, I think you told me before that in consulting, in your own consulting past in larger firms, it is not unusual that your own salary and the very fact of being paid or not is tied to time tracking. Is that correct?
Indeed, actually, time tracking creeps in several forms. So in consulting, it's like classical corporate consulting, billability is I wouldn't say the only metric, but definitely a metric that you need to keep a metric that you need to keep in mind when if you are shooting for the highest bonus, and if you're shooting for a promotion. So definitely is not gonna guarantee a promotion or the highest bonus, but it's very difficult to achieve those objectives without having a good enough billability as a consultant, and that goes also in other companies as well. From my experience with corporations as well, and this is a practice that happens also in not just in people-based businesses, but they tie time tracking to clearing the payroll, which is very extreme, but basically they require people to track 100% of the time in order to process the payroll, which is a pretty powerful incentive for people starting doing that.
Incentive is a nice way to put it.
Indeed.
No, but okay. So this is definitely at the extreme end of things, but having maybe a bonus structure around high billability, right? And then balancing that with tracking and measuring and optimizing profitability of projects, right? Because these two might be competing. This is one way of doing it, right? So there's multiple designs on how time tracking can be accounted for in your compensation system, but it's definitely one tool you have to increase that effort. And if it's just a one-off bonus, if somebody has tracked, let's say 95% of their contractual working hours at a billability or beyond 70%, for example, right? Then there's a small bonus tied to that, something like that. So it can be very simple. You can get a bit more sophisticated, but having some form of financial incentives for the team to track that can certainly be a part. But also, it shouldn't be the first thing you do. So that should be something to consider when everything else has been established. For example, and this is really a big one, making it as easy as possible, right? So we're talking about tool set, and we're especially talking about granularity. So as we mentioned multiple times now, both for, especially for internal stuff, but also for project work, the more aggregated you can have the time tracking, the better. Because if you get too granular, what happens is that there will be an ever-growing bucket called others, right, or miscellaneous, right? Because if you get too granular, then it's going to be really hard to identify the exact right bucket. Another thing is permission management, right? Who's able to bill or to track time in a specific client projects if there's 20 of them for one client, right? So you have to balance being as granular as necessary. For example, if you bill time or if you want to track profitability per project, you obviously want to understand how much time is allocated to a specific project, right? But you have to stay as aggregated as you can in order to keep time tracking easy. And then the other side of that is the tool set, right? You want to find a tool set that allows you to ideally track time where you're at. So there's, for example, some of you may know there's Harvest, an integration that, for example, works with Asana, also has its shortcomings. There are other tools where you just really press a button in one of the past records and continue recording, like, for example, Clockify, that work really well. You can build a time tracking tool, something we use internally in databases like Airtable. Regardless of what it is, it has to be as frictionless as possible, because you want to make the desired behavior, which in this case is time tracking, as easy as you can. So finding a way that is lean, streamlined, easy to do, and basically at the fingertips of what people are doing should be one of the first steps, right? And you could also think about the built-in time tracking capabilities. For example, I believe ClickUp has something like that. So there's multiple ways of doing that, but finding a way that's easy is good. And then the other truth to that is people will track time differently, right? One person will track time as they go. So they start a task, track, stop, work on something else, start tracking, stopping again, and then switch back to the first task. So their requirements might be a bit different than for somebody who goes in and at the end of the day tracks time in larger buckets, has 4 entries for the full day. I did 2 hours there, 3 hours there. I think these are equally valid, but you have to find a tool that works for both of these approaches, right? So that's really making it easy is really key to being successful with this effort. And then lastly, Francesco, and this ties into the question of metrics, and also it is true for everything that you want to change in a company. You as the leader, C-level member or CEO have to be disciplined about it yourself, and you have to make it a weekly conversation. Francesco, anything regarding this founder-led introduction of these things? What's your experience with discipline from the leadership level on these things?
I mean, indeed, that's many times one of the roadblocks, because the executives, the founders, they say they want people to track time, and when they say people, they mean everybody but them, and which doesn't work, because I mean, we understand that these people are very busy, but everybody is in his own way, no? So it's you really need to, and this is really one way for the leadership team also to take some of their own medicine. So they need to track time, and it doesn't need to be as precise, because sometimes we have these absurd conversations about, but I multitask a lot. I spent 3.5 minutes on this email for this client, and then I spend 35 seconds on an email for another client, and 15 just reading another one as well. And so how should I do that? And that this is clearly impossible. No, you cannot track time on this level of granularity, but you don't need to do so. You can, at least at the beginning, and just keep track 5 minutes on the first client, and in the long run, these time tracking entries will balance out to a reasonable number. So they don't need to be granular also in time wise in that sense. And again, making it a weekly conversation. So let's see the team billability on a weekly basis. Let's see the weekly project profitability. So the 2 metrics that they they fight against each other. So individual billability and project profitability, they balance each other. And if people keep them in mind, they understand that we need to track them. So these are some very simple measures to be kept in mind and put in place if you want to achieve some control over the time spent.
Yeah, agreed. And I think really the weekly conversation or whatever else the period might be or the interval might be is something that we also always recommend with regards to other KPIs, right? So it's not about the metric itself, it's about talking about it, right? So as soon as you sit down with your leadership team or with maybe your whole agency in your team meeting weekly and say, this is this week's billability, this is this week's project profitability, you already start making it a topic and people see that you're serious about it. And you have to be disciplined to continuously do that. So people understand, okay, this is here to stay, right? And just again, the Hawthorne effect, right, that we had earlier. As soon as people understand that this is a topic and this is viewed with regards to are we successful or not, are you successful or not, this can be a strong motivator to change behavior and start billing. But it is a process, right? It requires you to, if you come from a point where time tracking is done here and there, but only by 20% of the people for 10% of the time, and you want to move towards a consistently applied approach of we track time for our project and for our internal work, this will take time to change that behavior because it's just an additional task that you're trying to implement as a habit in your organization. And this will require you discipline until it becomes habitualized. Again, in combination with making the behavior very easy, making it attractive by tying it to some incentives or other compensation components, and also making very clear why this is important. But if you do these things, there's a good chance that you can change the behavior. And again, I think the benefits are clear: insights into profitability, understanding both project and company-wise, understanding clearly where you have capacity bottlenecks and process shortcomings, and also being very clear about what you bill your clients to make sure you don't leave any client fees or money on the table, right? So this is our recommendation around making your team track more time. Francesco, any closing remarks before we end this LinkedIn Live Leading Your Agency today?
I think we touched most of the topics. Again, we've seen how many companies they have like huge potential for growth, but they are flying blind and they don't know really where is their bottleneck for growth, or whether should they hire or not. And so we believe that these time-related measure and tracking is very important to understand that. So we don't sweat it. Do it in a very simple way, but keep that in mind because it's very, very difficult to grow your team without really knowing whether they spend time on projects or not.
Yeah, very good. Couldn't phrase it any better. Francesco, thank you so much for the input today. Everybody else, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to Francesco or myself to discuss this topic further. And beyond that, I wish you a happy time tracking. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday and see you next week or the week after. We see you the week after. Bye-bye. Thanks. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.